She missed her life-changing interview to change a stranger's flat tire. Little did she know, the old man she saved was the billionaire who held her destiny. Her future depended on a 9 a.m. interview. For the daughter of a maid, the Harrison Legacy Scholarship wasn't just tuition, it was an escape. But a violent storm left her running, her one good suit soaking in the icy rain. She was halfway there when she saw him, an old man, struggling alone with a hopelessly flat tire. Her mind screamed to keep walking. This was her one shot. But she stopped. As she knelt in the grit and grease, watching her opportunity disappear, she was unaware of one thing. The old man she was helping was a billionaire, and the one man holding the keys to her future. And where in the world are you joining from today? Let me know in the comments below. Now, I hope you enjoy the story. The 6:15 a.m. bus always smelled like stale coffee and diesel fumes. Claire Jensen sat perfectly still. She kept her back straight, just millimeters from the grimy vinyl seat. She would not let the city's dirt touch her today. Today was different. Her suit was navy blue. It was not new. Her mother, Susan, had found it at the Second Chance thrift store 3 weeks ago. It had a tiny moth hole on the lapel, which Susan had expertly stitched shut with matching thread. Last night, her mother had ironed it twice, pressing the creases sharp and clean. Claire, at 17, looked older in the suit. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, tight braid. It made her cheekbones look sharp. It made her look serious. She hoped it made her look worthy. In her coat pocket, her fingers closed around a small, heavy piece of metal. It was cold. A St. Christopher medal, worn smooth with time. It had belonged to her great-grandfather, Sergeant Elias Thorne. He had carried it through the mud of France. Her mother always said he was a man who never walked away from a fight and never, ever walked away from someone in need. The metal felt like a ballast, a small anchor in the churning sea of her nerves. The bus rattled as it crossed the Riverbend Bridge, leaving her neighborhood behind. Below them, the water was gray and sluggish. Riverbend was a place of cracked sidewalks, payday lenders, and buildings that had given up. It was home, but Claire wanted more. Her mother, Susan, was a maid. She cleaned the big, beautiful houses in Gableton Heights. Houses with lawns so green they looked fake. Susan left before dawn and came home after dark, her hands smelling of bleach and industrial soap. "You are smarter than this place, Claire," her mother had told her last night, her voice rough with tiredness. "You are more than just a maid's daughter. You go to that interview. You show them the Jensen grit. You earn what's yours." The interview. It was not just an interview. It was the Harrison Legacy Scholarship. A full ride to Gableton University. It was everything. Gableton was the gleaming castle on the hill. It was the world her mother cleaned but never entered. For Claire, the scholarship was not just tuition. It was an escape. It was a future where her hands didn't have to smell like bleach. The bus wheezed into the downtown exchange. The air changed. The buildings were now glass and steel. The people on the sidewalks wore expensive coats and carried leather briefcases. They moved with a purpose Claire always admired. She checked her watch. 7:45 a.m. The interview was at 9 a.m. sharp. Plenty of time. She just had to catch the crosstown bus to the university. Then, the sky opened. It was not a gentle spring rain. It was a sudden, violent assault. The wind howled between the skyscrapers, turning the rain to icy needles. People scattered, umbrellas flipping inside out. Within minutes, the streets were shallow rivers. Claire watched in horror as the crosstown bus she needed pulled away from the stop. It was too crowded to take on more passengers. The next one was in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Her buffer was gone. "No," she whispered. She couldn't be late. Not today. She checked her phone. The university was 20 blocks away. She could walk it in 30 minutes if she ran. Claire pulled the collar of her thin coat tight and stepped out of the bus shelter. The rain hit her instantly. It was cold, shocking, and relentless. She clutched her portfolio to her chest. Inside was her application, her references, and her essay, The Legacy of Duty. She ran. She kept her head down, dodging the few other desperate souls on the sidewalk. Her shoes, her mother's old work flats, were soaked in seconds. The water was icy. Her suit jacket clung to her back. The sharp crease in her slacks was already gone, replaced by a damp, clinging chill. "Just keep moving," she muttered. Her braid was coming loose, wet strands whipping against her face. She was halfway there. 8:20 a.m. She was going to make it, even if she looked like a drowned rat. Then she saw the car. It was a dark green sedan, sleek and expensive. It looked completely out of place, pulled awkwardly onto the curb. Its back tire was completely, hopelessly flat. Next to it stood an old man. He was tall, thin, and wore a beautiful wool coat that was now dark with rain. His white hair was plastered to his head. He was wrestling with a car jack, his hands shaking, his face a mask of frustration. "Blasted thing," he yelled, kicking the flat tire. The sound was lost in the wind. Claire slowed. Her mind screamed at her. "Keep walking. You are late. This is not your problem. This is your life. You're one shot." No one else was stopping. People hurried past, heads down, lost in their own storms. Claire stopped. She stood frozen, the rain dripping from her nose. She looked at the old man, who now leaned against the car, breathing hard. He looked defeated. She felt the weight of the metal in her pocket. A man who never walked away from someone in need. "Screw it," she whispered. She crossed the small stream running along the curb. "Sir," she called out. Her voice was thin against the storm. "Sir, do you need help?" The old man looked up, startled. He saw a 17-year-old girl, soaked to the bone, clutching a portfolio. "Young lady, you should be indoors," he shouted over the rain. I can't get this jack to hold. The ground is too slick. You have to brace it," Claire said, moving forward. She knew this. Her neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was always fixing junk cars in the alley. She had watched him change 100 tires. She dropped her backpack by the car door and put her portfolio carefully on the back seat, praying the leather would protect it. "Let me," she said. She knelt on the wet, gritty pavement. The cold soaked through the knees of her suit pants immediately. She didn't care. "The jack has to be on the frame, not the body," she said, her voice suddenly firm. She repositioned the jack, finding the solid steel. "Now, stand back, sir." He watched, stunned, as this teenage girl began to crank the jack with practiced, efficient movements. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked. "Riverbend," she said, not looking up. "You learn to fix things, or you don't go anywhere." The car lifted. The rain hammered her back. Her hands were stiff with cold, but she worked quickly, loosening the lug nuts. They were tight. She put her whole body into it, grunting with effort. "This is ridiculous," the old man said. He was holding a small, useless umbrella over her, trying to help. "You're ruining your clothes." "They're just clothes," Claire said, though the words tasted like a lie. This suit was her armor, and it was being destroyed. She pulled the flat tire off and rolled it away. It was heavy. She grabbed the spare from the trunk, a small, temporary donut tire. "You have an interview, don't you?" the old man asked. He had spotted the portfolio in his car. "Yes, sir." She was trying not to cry. Her hands were black with grease and road grime. She could feel a tear tracking through the dirt on her cheek. When 9 o'clock, he looked at his own watch. It was a simple, elegant gold watch. His eyes widened. "My heavens, child. It's 8:45. Claire's stomach dropped. 8:45. She had been here for 25 minutes. There was no way. She would never make it. It was over. She stopped moving. The rain and the wind seemed to fade. All she could hear was the pounding in her chest. All that work. Her mother's hopes. Gone. I'm late," she whispered. The old man's face softened. The frustration was gone, replaced by a deep, sudden understanding. "Finish the tire," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "What?" "Finish the tire, young lady. We're not done here." Claire stared at him. Then she nodded. She lifted the spare tire, locked it in place, and began tightening the lug nuts. She worked with a new, grim determination. She finished the job. She lowered the jack. She stood up. She was a complete mess. Her hair was a wreck. Her face was streaked with dirt. Her hands were black. Her suit was ruined, stained with grease and mud. The old man looked at her. He didn't say anything for a moment. "What is your name?" he asked. "Claire Jensen." "Well, Claire Jensen," he said, opening the driver's side door. "Get in the car. I'll take you to your interview." "Sir, I can't. I'm a mess. I can't get in your car like this." "I've seen worse," he said, with the first hint of a smile. "My driver's out sick, and I've made you late. It's the least I can do. Get in." Claire hesitated, then got in. The leather seats were smooth and smelled like old, expensive wood. She perched on the very edge, dripping onto the floor mat. The old man got in, started the engine, and pulled smoothly into traffic. Where at Gableton are you going? He asked. Founders Hall, Claire said, her voice small. He nodded, driving with an easy confidence. The windshield wipers fought against the storm. You know, the old man said, glancing at her. You stopped. No one else did. I guess. You knew you'd be late. You knew you were ruining your clothes. But you stopped anyway. Claire just looked down at her ruined hands. My great-grandfather. He always said you helped the person in front of you. The old man was quiet for a long time. They pulled up to the enormous, ivy-covered building. Founders Hall. It looked like a cathedral. It was 9:02 a.m. Thank you, sir, Claire said, grabbing her portfolio. Wait, he said. He was looking at her, really looking at her. Good luck, Claire Jensen. Claire nodded and ran. She sprinted up the marble steps, her wet shoes squeaking. She pushed open the heavy oak doors and stopped. The lobby was silent. The floor was gleaming marble. The ceiling was 2 stories high. It was warm, and it smelled like lemon polish and old books. A woman sat at a large, imposing desk. She wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, and her hair was in a flawless bun. She looked up as Claire entered. The woman's eyes traveled from Claire's soaking, wild hair, down to her grease-stained suit, and finally to the puddle forming at her feet. The woman's expression was one of pure, icy disapproval. Can I help you? The woman asked. Her voice was as cold as the rain outside. I'm here for the Harrison Scholarship, Claire stammered, wiping a wet strand of hair from her face. She left a streak of black grease on her cheek. I'm Claire Jensen. My interview was for 9 a.m. The woman, whose nameplate read Evelyn Price, Foundation Administrator, looked at the large, silent clock on the wall. It is 9:04 a.m., Miss Jensen. I know, I'm so sorry. The storm, the bus, and then there was a man. He had a flat tire, and I stopped to help him. Ms. Price held up a single, pale hand. The Harrison Foundation values 2 things above all, Miss Jensen: excellence and punctuality. Punctuality is the courtesy of kings. It is also the basic requirement of our scholarship recipients. Please, Claire said, her voice cracking. I'm here now. The 9 a.m. interview slot is over. The panel has already moved on to the 9:15 candidate. I am afraid you have missed your opportunity. The finality of it hit Claire like a physical blow. Missed her opportunity. But I did the right thing, Claire whispered, more to herself than to the woman. Ms. Price offered a thin, tight smile. That may be, but the right thing did not get you to your interview on time. We have a very long list of qualified candidates who are on time. A door opened down the hall. A young man in a perfect suit walked out, smiling. A moment later, a girl in a crisp private school uniform walked in. I'm afraid you'll have to leave, Ms. Price said, already looking back down at her computer. You are dripping on the floor. Claire stood there for one more second, frozen in her humiliation. The warmth of the lobby made her shiver in her wet clothes. She could feel the stares of other students waiting. She turned, her wet shoes squeaking in defeat, and walked back out the heavy oak doors. Back into the rain. The rain had not stopped. It seemed heavier now, as if the sky had decided to mock her. Claire stood on the marble steps of Founders Hall. She was numb. The cold from her wet clothes had seeped into her bones, but it was nothing compared to the chill in her heart. She had failed. It was a simple, brutal fact. She had failed her mother. She had failed herself. She looked down at her hands. They were still covered in black grease and road grime. The rain was washing some of it away, creating small, dirty rivers that ran down her wrists and disappeared into the sleeves of her ruined suit. She could see her reflection in the dark glass of the oak doors. A ghost of a girl. Her blonde hair was a tangled, wet mess. The dirt streak on her cheek looked like a scar. The sharp, serious person she had tried to be this morning was gone. In her place was a wet, dirty girl from Riverbend. Miss Price had been right. She was just a maid's daughter, dripping on their perfect floor. Claire pulled the street Christopher medal from her pocket. It was still there. You helped the person in front of you. A lot of good that did me, Grandpa, she whispered to the empty air. Her voice broke. She took a breath and forced her legs to move. She walked down the steps, one by one, each step feeling heavier than the last. She did not run. There was no point in running now. Her future was gone. The crosstown bus stop was just a block away. She huddled under the small plastic shelter, but the wind whipped the rain in, sideways. She was shivering, a deep, uncontrollable shaking. Other students waited, too. They were dressed in expensive raincoats and carried Gableton University book bags. They glanced at her, then quickly looked away, their faces carefully blank. They didn't want to see her. She was a problem. She was a failure. When the bus finally arrived, it was warm inside. The heat hit her cold skin and made her itch. She fumbled in her pocket for her bus pass, her fingers stiff and clumsy. She found a seat in the back, by the window. The vinyl was cracked, but it was dry. She stared out, watching the beautiful, ivy-covered campus slide by. She had dreamed of walking these paths. She had imagined sitting in those libraries, her head full of new ideas. Now, she was just watching it disappear. The bus crossed the Riverbend Bridge. The world outside the window changed. The glass and steel gave way to brick and plywood. The green lawns became patches of muddy grass. The shame was so heavy it felt like a physical weight on her chest. How could she face her mother? Susan had woken up at 4:30 a.m. to make her breakfast. 2 eggs, scrambled, and a piece of toast with the last of the strawberry jam. For energy, she'd said. Susan had probably skipped her own breakfast to make sure Claire had enough. Susan had spent 3 hours at the thrift store finding that suit. She had paid $8 for it. $8 that should have gone to the electric bill. Claire felt tears mix with the rain on her face. She wiped them away, leaving another streak of grime. She got off the bus 3 blocks from her apartment. The rain was finally slowing to a miserable drizzle. The sky was the color of cement. Their building was old. The lobby smelled of damp carpet and boiled cabbage. She walked up the 3 flights of stairs. The elevator had been broken for 6 months. She stood outside her apartment door, 3B. She could hear the small, tinny sound of the old radio her mother kept in the kitchen. She raised her hand to knock, then stopped. She could not do it. She sat down on the floor in the hallway, right outside her own door. She pulled her knees to her chest and finally, silently, let herself cry. She cried for the scholarship, for the suit, for the look on her mother's face. She cried because she was so cold. She wasn't sure how long she sat there. 5 minutes. 10. The door, 3B, opened. Susan Jensen stood there. She was still in her gray work uniform. Her shift at the Heights didn't start until noon on Wednesdays. Her hair, the same blonde as Claire's but faded with work, was pulled back in a simple clip. She looked at her daughter. She took in the wet hair, the ruined suit, the grease-stained hands, and the tears. Susan did not ask what happened. She did not yell. She just stepped into the hallway, knelt down on the dirty carpet, a carpet she had scrubbed herself more than once, and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "Oh, honey," Susan whispered, her voice full of a pain that matched Claire's. "You're freezing." She pulled Claire to her feet and brought her inside, locking the door behind them. The apartment was small, but it was spotless. "Go," Susan said, her voice firm now. "Get in the shower. A hot shower. Right now." Claire didn't argue. She just nodded, her teeth chattering. 20 minutes later, Claire came out of the bathroom. She was wrapped in her worn-out bathrobe. Her hair was clean, but still damp. She felt human again, but the dread was still there. Susan was in the small kitchen. She had a cup of tea waiting. It was hot, sweet, and milky, just how Claire liked it. Claire sat at the small kitchen table. The formica was worn thin in spots. "Okay," Susan said, sitting across from her. She folded her hands on the table. "Tell me." So Claire told her. She told her about the bus, the run in the rain, the old man, the flat tire. She told her about the car jack, the grease, and the donut spare. "He drove me there, Mom," Claire said, her voice quiet. "He drove me right to the door. But I was late." "How late?" "For minutes." Susan closed her eyes. "Just for a second." "And the woman at the desk. Miss Price. She wouldn't let me in. She said my time was over. She said I was dripping on the floor." Susan stared at her hands. Her knuckles were red and chapped. "I ruined this suit, Mom," Claire whispered, the final confession. "I'm so sorry. I ruined it." For a long time, the only sound was the drip of the kitchen faucet. Finally, Susan looked up. Her eyes were not angry. They were something else. Something Claire couldn't read. "You stopped," Susan said. "What?" "You were late. You were running in a storm. Your whole future was on the line. And you saw an old man, a stranger, in trouble. And you stopped." "Ah, yes. I did. I missed it, Mom. I missed everything." "Claire," Susan said, leaning forward. She reached out and took Claire's clean, warm hand. "You did not miss everything. But the scholarship. Yes, that would have been good. That would have made things easier. Susan sighed, a deep, tired sound. But that is just money, Claire. That is just a way to pay for school. It is not. It is not your character. I don't understand. Your great-grandfather, Elias, Susan said, her eyes lighting up. He didn't get that medal for being on time. He got it because when everyone else was retreating, he ran towards the trouble to pull two men to safety. Under fire. He did what was right, not what was easy. She squeezed Claire's hand. You have that in you. You have that Jensen grit. You saw someone in trouble, and you didn't walk away. You got your hands dirty. You helped. I have never been more proud of you than I am right this second. Tears welled up in Claire's eyes again, but this time they were different. But what do we do now? Claire asked. The future was still a blank, terrifying wall. Now, Susan said, giving a small, weary smile. Now, I go to work. I have to clean the Graham family's mansion. And you are going to call the community college. We'll find a way. We always find a way. Susan stood up, grabbing her keys and her thin coat. She paused at the door. You're a good person, Claire Jensen. Don't ever let anyone, not even some fancy woman in a gray suit, tell you otherwise. Susan left. Claire sat alone at the kitchen table, the hot tea warming her hands. She felt strange. She was still devastated. The loss was a huge, hollow ache inside her. But beneath it, something else was growing. A small, warm spark. Her mother was proud of her. She had failed the test. But maybe, just maybe, she had passed a different one. Meanwhile, across town, the dark green sedan pulled into a private, heated underground garage. The old man, Robert Graham, got out of the car. He looked at the small, temporary donut tire. He looked at the mud and grease on his passenger side floor mat. He looked at his own expensive shoes, which were stained with mud. He walked to the private elevator, which opened directly into the penthouse. He entered a room so large it felt empty. The walls were glass, showing the entire city skyline, still gray and covered in rain. A man in a sharp suit, his chief of staff, was waiting for him. Mr. Graham, the man said, his voice clipped. You're late. The board call is in 5 minutes. And, my goodness, what happened to you? Your driver. My driver is fine, Thomas, Robert said, shrugging off his wet coat. I had some car trouble. Car trouble? Sir, you should have called. We would have sent another car immediately. It's handled, Robert said. He walked to his desk, a massive piece of dark wood. He looked at his hands, noticing a small smear of grease on his cuff. Thomas, he said, ignoring the flashing light on his phone. Sir, I need you to find someone for me. A young woman. Her name is Claire Jensen. Claire Jensen. Thomas repeated, typing the name into his tablet. And where might I find her? I have no idea, Robert said. He looked out the window at the rain. But she was applying for the Harrison Scholarship this morning. At Gableton. Thomas's fingers stopped. The Harrison Scholarship? Sir, that's your scholarship. The one you founded. Yes, Robert Graham said, a small, complex smile playing on his lips. It is. Get me Evelyn Price on the line. And then, find me everything you can on Claire Jensen. Claire sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The tea in her cup grew cold. The small, warm spark of her mother's pride was still there, but it was being choked by the cold, damp reality of their situation. Her mother was right. Character was important. But character didn't pay the rent. She got up and walked into her tiny bedroom. The navy blue suit was lying in a heap on the floor, a place where she had dropped it in her despair. She picked it up. It was heavy with water, stained with black grease, and torn at the knee where she had knelt on the jagged pavement. It was ruined. Just like she said. She carried it to the kitchen sink, as if she could fix it. She ran cold water over the fabric, trying to rinse out the grime. But the grease had set in. The more she rubbed, the more it just smeared, a dark, spreading stain. It was useless. She was trying to scrub away her failure, but it wouldn't budge. She finally gave up, leaving the suit in a sad pile by the sink. Okay, she said to the empty apartment. Community college. She sat back at the table with her laptop, an old, slow machine that took 5 minutes to boot up. She went to the Gableton University website first. It loaded with a beautiful video of smiling students on a sunny green lawn. Find your future, the headline read. Claire closed the tab. She typed in Riverbend Community College. The website was simple blue and white. It looked like a government form. She clicked on tuition. Even this, she realized, was going to be hard. There were application fees, books, bus fare. Her mother's words came back. We always find a way. Claire nodded. Okay, away. She opened a new tab. Jobs near Riverbend. 17-year-old. The results were what she expected. Fast food. Stocking shelves. Cleaning. She would have to work full-time. Maybe she could take night classes. The dream of Gableton, of lecture halls and ivy, felt like it was dissolving, turning into a different, grayer future. A future of exhaustion. A future just like her mother's. Just as she was about to close the laptop, the mail slot in the front door clattered. She walked over and picked up the small pile of envelopes. Bills for her mother. A grocery store flyer. And one thin envelope. It was white, with a small, clear window. It was addressed to Susan Jensen. In the window, 2 words were visible, printed in harsh, red ink. Final notice. Claire's breath caught. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. She knew it was the electric company. They had been finding a way with the electric bill for 3 months, paying just enough to keep it on. This notice felt different. The scholarship. It hadn't just been for her. It hadn't just been an escape to a better life. It had been their lifeline. It was the money that would have freed up her mother's paycheck to cover basics like electricity. She had not just missed her interview. She had not just ruined a suit. She had failed to save them. The weight of the old man's flat tire suddenly felt immense. She had traded her family's security for a stranger. She put the envelope on the kitchen table on top of the job's website and stared at it. The spark of pride was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. Across town, Susan Jensen was on her hands and knees. She was in the grand library of the Graham estate. The house wasn't just a house. It was a mansion perched on the highest hill in Gableton Heights, overlooking the entire city. Susan had been on the cleaning staff here for 3 years. She rarely saw the owner, Mr. Graham. The staff said he was a recluse, an old-money widower who spent most of his time in his penthouse office downtown or traveling. But he demanded perfection in his home. Susan was polishing the intricate wood inlay of the floor. Her knees ached. Her back was sore. But her movements were precise, practiced. She took pride in her work. If she was going to be a maid, she would be the best maid. But today, her mind was not on the floor. It was in a small apartment in Riverbend. It was on a rainy sidewalk. It was with her daughter. She has that Jensen grit. Susan smiled, a small, private smile, as she polished. She was proud, but she was also terrified. Claire was smart, smarter than anyone Susan knew. But the world was not kind to smart girls from Riverbend. The world demanded you be on time. The world demanded you have the right suit. You're a million miles away, Susan. Susan looked up. It was Mrs. Davies, the head housekeeper. She was a kind woman, older, with a stern face but gentle eyes. Just thinking, Mrs. Davies, Susan said, rising to her feet and wincing slightly. About your girl? The big interview. Susan had told her about it last week. Mrs. Davies had even let her take the morning off to see Claire out the door. Susan's smile faded. She didn't make it. Oh dear. Mrs. Davies' face fell. What happened? The storm. The storm and a flat tire. Susan explained. She told her about the old man, the ruined suit, and the woman at the front desk. She didn't mention her pride. She just told the facts. Well, Mrs. Davies said, folding her arms. That's just rotten. The poor girl. She did the right thing, Susan said, her voice quiet but fierce. She did, Mrs. Davies agreed. But the right thing doesn't often pay the bills, does it? No, ma'am. Well, Mrs. Davies sighed, handing Susan the feather duster. Back to it. Mr. Graham is having guests tonight. He wants the whole first floor to gleam. Susan nodded and moved to the massive, carved fireplace. On the mantelpiece were photographs. She dusted them every Wednesday. Most were of Mr. Graham at different ages, or of landscapes. But the main one, in a heavy silver frame, was of a smiling, dark-haired woman. Susan knew this was Eleanor Harrison Graham. The estate was named after her. The Harrison Foundation was named after her. She had died years ago. Next to it was a newer photo. It was Mr. Graham, in a dark suit, shaking hands with the governor. Susan paused. She looked closer at the photo. The man was smiling at the camera. He was tall, with white hair and a strong, sharp face. He looked familiar. Susan's heart gave a strange little jump. No, It couldn't be. She looked at the face in the picture. She tried to imagine it plastered with rain, looking frustrated, yelling at a tire. She shook her head. "Don't be foolish, Susan," she muttered. Mr. Graham was a billionaire. He didn't change his own tires. He was a face in a photo, a name on her paycheck. He wasn't some old man on a curb. She finished dusting the frame and moved on. But the image stayed in her mind. She was unkempt. And 4 minutes late. Robert Graham sat behind his desk in the penthouse, the phone pressed to his ear. He was listening to Evelyn Price. His face was like stone. "And you sent her away," Robert stated. It was not a question. "Sir, the rules of the foundation are clear." Evelyn's voice was sharp, defensive. "We cannot make exceptions. It would be unfair to the candidates who followed the rules." "The rules," Robert repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Tell me, Evelyn, did you look at her application?" Of course, I reviewed all the finalists. Her grades were excellent, but her background. Riverbend. It's what, Evelyn? It is not typical for a Harrison scholar. We must maintain standards." "You mean she didn't go to the right prep school? Her mother doesn't attend the right charity galas." "Mr. Graham, I only mean that she was ill-prepared," Evelyn said, her voice rising. She was covered in filth. It was a sign of disrespect. She clearly does not possess the poise we expect. Robert looked down at his own cuff, at the small smear of grease he had left there as a reminder. "Poise," he said. "Yes, I see. A young woman, on her way to the most important meeting of her life, stops in a full-blown storm. She stops to help a stranger. She destroys her clothes. She gets covered in filth and grease. She does this knowing she will be late, knowing she will probably lose her one chance. And she does it anyway." There was a dead silence on the line. Evelyn was finally, truly quiet. "Evelyn," Robert continued, "that is not a lack of poise. That is character. That is exactly what the Harrison legacy is supposed to be about. It is not about poise. It's about duty." "But, sir, did you read her essay?" Robert cut in. I glanced at it." "Read it," Robert commanded. "And then, I want you to take a 2-week, paid leave of absence. Effective immediately." "Sir, you can't." "I can. And I have. Reevaluate your definition of standards while you are gone. We will speak when you return." He hung up the phone, cutting off her sputtered protest. Thomas, his chief of staff, had been standing by the window, silent. "Thomas, sir, what did you find on Elias Thorne?" "Her great-grandfather." Thomas picked up his tablet. "Sergeant Elias Thorne, 3rd Infantry Division. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. Posthumously." "What for?" Robert asked, though he already knew the answer. "August 1944. France. His platoon was pinned down in a farmhouse. The farmhouse was hit by mortar fire and caught fire. Thorne. Well, sir, he was wounded, but he ran back into the burning building. Twice. He pulled 2 men out. He died going back in for a third." Robert closed his eyes. "You helped the person in front of you." "The legacy of duty," Robert said, his voice thick. "Sir, that was the title of her essay." Robert stood up. He walked to the window and looked down at the city. The rain had finally stopped. The city was gleaming, washed clean. She wrote about him. She wrote that legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about what you do, right now, when no one is looking. Robert turned back to Thomas. His eyes were clear and sharp. She was quoting her mother, who was quoting her great-grandfather. "Sir, never mind. Thomas, what is my schedule like for the next hour?" "You have a meeting with the board of the new hospital wing, sir. It's in 20 minutes. Cancel it," Robert said, grabbing the coat he had worn that morning. It was still slightly damp. "Cancel it. Sir, this is the 3rd time. They'll understand. And find out where Susan Jensen works." "Susan Jensen? The mother?" "Yes. Find out. But first, get the car. You're driving. I want to go to Riverbend." The black sedan was silent, gliding through the streets like a shadow. It was the same car, but Robert Graham was not driving. Thomas was at the wheel, his face a perfect mask of professional calm. He navigated the growing potholes of Riverbend with a tense precision. Robert sat in the back, looking out the window. The world he owned, the world of glass towers and manicured lawns, had vanished. Here, the buildings were squat, brick, and tired. The windows were covered in grates. The lawns were patches of dirt and weeds. He saw people on the corners, waiting for buses, their shoulders slumped, their faces worn. He saw the payday lenders, the pawn shops, the boarded-up storefronts. This was the world that had produced Claire Jensen. "We are here, sir," Thomas said, his voice quiet. He pulled the car to the curb in front of a 3-story brick apartment building. The name, the Riverbend Arms, was on a cracked plastic sign. "Wait in the car," Robert said. "Sir, I must insist." "Wait in the car, Thomas." Robert got out. He smoothed his still damp wool coat. He looked up at the building. It was identical to a dozen others on the street. He pushed open the flimsy metal and glass door. The lobby smelled of boiled cabbage and damp. He saw the broken elevator and the "out of order" sign, written in marker on a piece of cardboard. He took the stairs. He walked past 1B, 2B. His footsteps echoed in the cinder-block stairwell. He felt the climb in his knees. He reached the 3rd floor. The hallway was dark, the carpet worn through to the floorboards in places. He found 3B. He stood outside the door, the same way Claire had just a few hours earlier. He raised his hand to knock. But before he could, he saw it. It was sticking out of the mail slot, a small white rectangle, angled just so. He could see the red ink. Final notice. He didn't touch it. He just looked at it. He thought of Evelyn Price. He thought of her complaints about standards and poise. He knocked. Inside, Claire was still staring at the electric bill. It felt like a verdict. She was running numbers in her head. How many hours at minimum wage to pay this? How many to pay this and next month's rent? The knock on the door made her jump. She froze. Who was that? Landlord? They never knocked. They just left notes. The knock came again. Firmer. Who is it? She called out, her voice shaky. I'm looking for Claire Jensen. The voice was deep and old and familiar. Claire's blood ran cold. She slowly walked to the door. She looked through the peephole. It was him. The old man from the ring. The man with the flat tire. He was standing in her hallway. He was clean now. His white hair was perfectly combed. He wore the same expensive wool coat, but it was dry. He looked powerful. What was he doing here? Had she done something wrong? Did she scratch his car? Did she not tighten the lug nuts enough? She opened the door, just a crack, the chain still on. Sir. The old man looked at her. He didn't smile. His eyes were kind, but they were also intense. He looked past her, into the small, clean apartment. His gaze landed on the ruined suit, still in a sad, wet pile by the sink. Miss Jensen, he said. Claire, may I come in? What is this about? How did you find me? I have some resources, he said simply. I believe I made you late for your interview. It's fine, Claire said, pulling her bathrobe tighter. It's over. No, he said, it's not. Please. I promise I am not here to cause trouble. Claire hesitated. Her great-grandfather would have helped him, but her mother had told her never to open the door for strangers. He was not, she realized, a stranger. She had spent 25 minutes in a storm with him. She slowly unhooked the chain and opened the door. Robert Graham stepped into the small apartment. He was a large man, and the tiny living room seemed to shrink around him. He looked around. It was tiny. It was old. The furniture was worn, but it was immaculate. Every surface was dusted. The floor was clean. He saw a small, framed photo on a side table. A young woman in a work uniform, Susan, holding a baby, Claire. Please, sit, Claire said, gesturing to the small, faded sofa. Thank you, no, Robert said. He turned to her. The interview you missed. It was for the Harrison Legacy Scholarship. Yes. I am on the board of the Harrison Foundation, he said. Claire's heart stopped. You're what? I'm afraid, he continued, his voice gentle, that I am the man who founded it. My late wife was Eleanor Harrison. Claire couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. The man whose tire she had changed. The man who had made her late. The man who was the scholarship. My name is Robert Graham, he said. Claire just stared at him. The name clicked. Graham. The Graham estate. The richest, most powerful family in the state. The woman at the desk. Ms. Price. Ms. Price has been asked to take a leave of absence, Robert said, his voice turning to steel. She does not, it seems, understand the meaning of the word legacy. I don't understand, Claire whispered. I read your essay, Claire. The Legacy of Duty. You read it. Just now. In the car. He reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, a printout. You wrote about your great-grandfather. Sergeant Elias Thorne. Yes. He's my family's hero. He ran into a burning building, Robert said, his voice a low rumble. He ran in, knowing he would get burned. He did it to save his men. He did what was right, not what was easy. He looked from the essay in his hand to the ruined suit by the sink, covered in grease and mud. You had a choice this morning, he said. You could have kept running. You could have walked past me. It would have been the smart thing to do. It would have been the easy thing to do. You would have been on time. He took a step closer. But you didn't. You saw someone in trouble, and you ran towards the trouble. You got on your knees, in the mud, and you fixed it. You, Claire Jensen, have the Jensen grit. You have the Thorne legacy. Claire was crying now, silent tears rolling down her face. She wasn't cold. She wasn't ashamed. She started, and then the door opened again. It was Susan. She had finished her shift early. Mrs. Davies had said there was a matter at the main house, and she could leave. She walked in, looking tired, her work bag slung over her shoulder. Claire, honey, Susan stopped dead in the doorway. She looked at her daughter, who was crying. And then she looked at the man standing in her living room. It was him, the man from the photograph on the mantelpiece. The man whose house she had just spent 4 hours cleaning. He was standing in her apartment. Mr. Graham, she breathed. The name was a question, a prayer, a gasp of pure shock. Robert turned. His face softened completely. Mrs. Jensen, he said. Susan, I believe we've met. Although you have a daughter who changes a tire much faster than I do. Susan's hand flew to her mouth. She looked from Robert to Claire and back to Robert. You were the old man, Susan whispered. In the rain, with the flat tire. You were him. I was, Robert said. Susan's legs felt weak. She leaned against the doorframe. And you are Mr. Graham. My boss. I am. Susan started to laugh. It was a high, thin sound, bordering on hysteria. She missed the scholarship. She missed the Harrison scholarship, because she was helping Mr. Harrison Graham. It appears so, Robert said, a small smile finally touching his lips. I need to sit down, Susan said. Claire rushed forward and helped her mother to the sofa. Robert Graham looked at the two of them, this small, strong family. He saw the final notice, still sticking out of the mail slot. He saw the worn-out sofa. And he saw the fierce, unbreakable pride in Susan's eyes as she looked at her daughter. Claire, he said, the panel did not get to interview you. But I did. My interview was on a wet sidewalk on East 9th Street. And you passed. He reached into his pocket again. He pulled out a long, white envelope. It was not a bill. It was from the Harrison Foundation. The scholarship is yours, he said. Full tuition, room and board, books, and a living stipend. For all 4 years. Claire sobbed, a loud, ragged sound. Susan just held her hand, tears streaming down her own face. But that's not all, Robert said. He turned to Susan. Susan, you have been cleaning my floors for 3 years. Yes, sir, Susan said, wiping her eyes. I think that is a waste of your talent. My head housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, is retiring next year. She has been asking me to train her replacement. She speaks very highly of you. Sir, I would like to offer you the position of household manager for the Graham estate. Effective immediately. You will be in charge of the entire staff. The pay? Well, the pay is considerably more than you are making now, and it comes with a house on the estate. Susan looked at him, completely stunned. A house, a salary, and, Robert said, his voice final. I will be paying for a new suit for Claire, and for a full detail on my car. She left a terrible amount of mud in it. For the first time that day, Claire laughed. It was a real laugh, mixed with tears. Thank you, she whispered, standing up. No, Robert said. He walked over to her. He was just an old man again, his eyes kind. Thank you, Claire. I am a very rich man. I have spent my life building things, buying things. But today, you reminded me what legacy really means. It isn't a building with your name on it. It's this. He pointed to the St. Christopher medal, which Claire was now clutching in her hand. It's the choice you make when no one is watching. Your great-grandfather would be, he is, very proud of you. Robert nodded to them both. Thomas will be in touch tomorrow with all the paperwork. Susan, I expect to see you at the main house on Monday. Not, he added, with a mop. He let himself out. They heard his heavy footsteps going down the stairs. Claire and Susan sat in the silence. The apartment was the same. The furniture was the same. But everything had changed. Claire looked at the kitchen table. The final notice was still there, a flash of red. She picked it up. She looked at her mother. Susan smiled, a slow, wide smile that lit up her whole face. Claire walked over to the trash can and dropped the envelope in. She sat back down, her hand closed tight around the small, worn metal in her palm. It was warm. 3 months later, the light in the Gableton University library was warm. It smelled of old paper, lemon-scented wood polish, and the faint, sweet scent of coffee from the cafe downstairs. Claire Jensen turned a page. The book was heavy, titled Principles of Macroeconomics. 3 months ago, she would have found the words intimidating. Now, she just found them interesting. She was not in a thrift store suit. She wore a simple knit sweater and jeans. Her blonde hair was no longer in a severe, tight braid. It fell softly on her shoulders. She was still serious. She was still focused. But the sharp, nervous edge was gone. She was no longer an imposter, dripping on the floor. She belonged. A text message lit up her phone. It was from her mother. Dinner at 6. Don't be late. Mrs. Davies taught me how to make a roast. Claire smiled. She packed her books into a sturdy Gableton book bag. As she zipped it up, her fingers brushed against the small, heavy lump in an inner pocket. The street Christopher medal. She still carried it. Not as a shield, but as a reminder. She walked out of the library and into the autumn sun. The campus was beautiful. Students rushed past, heading to class or to the dining hall. Claire was one of them. She was a Harrison Scholar. The word still felt new and wonderful. Twice a week, she met with Robert Graham. He insisted on it. They would sit in the campus coffee shop. He always ordered a plain, black coffee, and he would ask about her classes. He was not a grandfatherly figure. He was a mentor. He was sharp, demanding, and pushed her to think bigger. Don't just read the book, Claire, he had told her last week. Question it. Find the flaw in the author's logic. Your future is not about knowing things. It's about understanding them. She understood. She got on the clean, quiet crosstown bus. This time, she had a semester pass, paid for by the scholarship stipend. She rode it not to Riverbend, but to the gates of Gableton Heights. The gates were large and black, but they were open. The bus stopped, and she walked up a long, winding drive. The houses were mansions, set back from the road, hidden by old, sprawling trees. She walked past the main house, the Graham estate, where her mother now worked. She waved to the security guard at the booth, who smiled and waved back. She continued down a smaller path, to a row of neat, clean cottages. They were for the estate's senior staff. She stopped at number 3. It was white, with a dark green door and a small porch. Flowers, planted by her mother, bloomed in the window boxes. She opened the door. The apartment in Riverbend had always smelled of bleach and worry. This house smelled like roast beef. Mom, Claire called out, dropping her bag by the door. In here, Susan's voice came from the kitchen. Claire walked in. The kitchen was bright, with a window that looked out over a green, rolling lawn. Susan Jensen stood at the counter. She was not in a gray maid's uniform. She wore tailored black slacks and a crisp white shirt. Her hair was in a neat, professional bun. She looked calm. She looked like a boss. How was class? Susan asked, basting the roast. She moved with a new, unhurried confidence. Hard, Claire said, leaning on the counter. Professor Davies is tough. Good, Susan said. Tough is how you learn. Now, go set the table. And wash your hands. This isn't Riverbend. We use the good forks. Susan was thriving. As household manager, she was in charge of a staff of 12. She managed schedules, handled payroll, and organized events for Mr. Graham. She had a mind for logistics, something she'd always used to juggle their bills. Now, she was using it to run a multi-million-dollar estate. They sat at a small, solid oak table. 3 months ago, their dinners had been at a wobbly formica table with the sound of sirens outside. Now it was quiet. The only sound was the clink of silverware on heavy plates. Mr. Graham is having the governor over next week, Susan said, cutting her meat. He asked me to sit in on the menu planning. That's amazing, Mom. It's just work, Claire, Susan said. But she was smiling. The deep, worried lines that had lived around her eyes for 17 years were starting to fade. How is your economics? You're not struggling. I'm keeping up, Claire said. It's a lot, but I like it. Good. Susan put her fork down. She looked at her daughter. You know, I still think about that morning. The rain. Me too, Claire whispered. I was so scared for you. I was so angry at that woman, Miss Price. Susan shook her head. But then I think, if you hadn't stopped for him, if you had just kept running, I would have been on time, Claire said. Yes, you would have been on time. You might have gotten the scholarship. But we wouldn't be here. Where would we be? Susan looked around the warm, safe kitchen. She looked at her daughter, who was healthy, bright, and full of promise. We would still be in Riverbend, Susan said, her voice soft. We would still be hoping to escape. We would not be home. After dinner, Claire helped with the dishes. She pulled the Street Christopher medal from her pocket and set it on the windowsill above the sink. It caught the light from the setting sun, gleaming. She was not a maid's daughter. She was not a victim of a storm. She was Claire Jensen. She was a Harrison Scholar. And she was her mother's daughter. She had her great-grandfather's grit. She had earned this. They both had. And that's where Claire's story, her new life, truly begins. Whenever I share a story like this, I hope it's a reminder of how one choice, one moment of kindness when everything is on the line, can change an entire future. I hope it gave you a chance to step out of your everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening, maybe on a break or just settling in. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We're always trying to improve, so feel free to drop your feedback. Thanks for spending this time with me.